The Great Depression is often remembered as a time of despair and hardship, and for good reason. It shattered economies, tore apart communities, and pushed millions into poverty, but it was also a time of extraordinary innovation. When survival was on the line, Americans had to adapt. They took what little they had and turned it into something new. Out of the ruins of a broken system came innovations, programs, and ideas that would shape the nation for decades to come. Today, we explore the story of how innovation flourished in the face of adversity. Agricultural innovations. Farmers were hit especially hard during the Great Depression.
We hollered at each other for a while. Then I made out that his father was down by the lower barn.
Falling crop prices and mounting debt drove thousands off their land. But in this struggle, a new kind of thinking emerged. One of the most important agricultural innovations wasn't a machine, it was a method: soil conservation. Soil conservation wasn't something entirely new, though. It had already existed since ancient times and was practiced by the Sumerian and the Babylonian citizens. However, in the 1930s, a proper soil conservation movement ushered due to the Dust Bowl crisis. During the Dust Bowl, massive dust storms swept across the Great Plains, choking skies and killing crops.
Powered by high-altitude winds, the monster rips across the country looking for prey.
The land had been overworked, and when drought came, there was nothing to hold the soil down. In response, scientists and farmers began to rethink how land should be treated. The U.S. government formed the Soil Conservation Service, known as SCS in short, in 1935. The goal of the SCS was to teach farmers how to rotate crops, plant windbreaks, and contour plow, a technique that followed the natural shape of the land to prevent erosion. Farmers also began experimenting with drought-resistant crops. In Kansas and Oklahoma, some turned to hardy sorghum varieties instead of water-hungry corn. Others built small-scale irrigation systems using salvaged materials. These practices started as a way to save the farms, but gradually they evolved into proper sustainability policies. The agricultural lessons learned during the Dust Bowl laid the foundation for modern conservation farming, and they remain deeply embedded in agricultural science today. Automotive innovations. Engineering was already on the rise during the early 1900s, and some of the biggest and richest companies were automotive giants. You could think of them like the Apple or Microsoft of the 20th century. The auto industry did not stop evolving even as factories slowed and car sales collapsed. The Great Depression forced automakers to innovate or die. Out of this pressure came improvements that would permanently change the way cars were made and used. In Detroit, engineers developed more efficient assembly lines, cutting waste and improving quality.
The simple shift cut assembly line time from 12.5 hours to just 93 minutes by 1924.
Companies like Ford and General Motors introduced streamlined car designs, not just for style, but to reduce manufacturing costs and fuel consumption. Lighter bodies and more aerodynamic shapes were born from necessity, but quickly became the norm. Perhaps even more significant was the rise of used cars. Before the Depression, car ownership was a luxury, but as incomes dried up, Americans looked for alternatives. Used car lots popped up across the country. Mechanics found new value in keeping old vehicles running longer. This shift helped democratize transportation, making cars accessible to working-class families and planting the seed for the American car culture that would boom in the 1950s. On farms, old trucks were converted into hybrid vehicles. Some ran on alternative fuels like wood gas. People got creative with what they had and started customizing cars for hauling, planting, even mobile housing. Social program innovations. The federal government's response to the Depression ushered in some of the most transformative social programs in American history. Under Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, innovation wasn't confined to machines or methods. It ultimately extended to policy. The Social Security Act of 1935 was a radical idea at the time. It created a safety net for the elderly, the disabled, and most importantly, the unemployed. For the first time, the government guaranteed a basic level of support for its most vulnerable citizens. The idea that society has a responsibility to protect its own became a cornerstone of American political life. Other programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration reimagined unemployment. Instead of handing out charity, these programs paid people to work. The work was varied and could be anything from planting trees and building roads to painting murals.
The Civilian Conservation Corps was a public service organization that focused on the conservation of environmental resources in the United States during the Great Depression.
The idea was simple but powerful: dignity through work. It gave people a sense of purpose and helped rebuild the physical and cultural landscape of the nation. These social innovations reshaped the American relationship with the government. Before the Depression, most people believed the market would sort itself out. But when the market failed, it was the state that stepped in with creative solutions. The programs born in the 1930s continue to influence debates about welfare and social justice to this day. Psychological innovations. Innovation wasn't just in fields and factories. It was also in hearts and minds. The emotional toll of the Great Depression was enormous, but in the darkness, new approaches to mental health and human behavior began to emerge. In the early 1930s, psychologists began to explore the effects of long-term stress, unemployment, and dislocation. Clinics popped up in cities like New York and Chicago, offering low-cost counseling to people struggling with anxiety, depression, and hopelessness. For the first time, mental health was treated as a public concern rather than a private failure. One of the most powerful ideas to come out of this period was the importance of community support and mutual aid. Families began to lean on extended kin networks. Churches and neighborhoods formed mutual aid societies. People learned that psychological strength came not from rugged individualism, but from shared resilience. At the same time, new forms of psychological interventions began to take shape. Group counseling, vocational therapy, and social work expanded in reach and legitimacy. Even the arts became a form of healing. Drama clubs, music collectives, and storytelling circles gave voice to trauma and helped people process their experiences. The WPA funded artists and writers not just to beautify the country, but to help the country feel again. These early steps helped lay the groundwork for a national conversation about mental health, one that continues to evolve today. The Depression forced America to confront the emotional weight of economic collapse and find new ways to carry it. Lasting impacts. So much of what we take for granted today has its roots in this period of extreme hardship. The idea that government should guarantee a basic income for the elderly. The expectation that cars are a part of everyday life, not a luxury. The understanding that farming must work with nature, not against it. The belief that psychological well-being matters just as much as physical survival. Many of the tools and programs developed in the 1930s became permanent fixtures. Social Security still serves millions. Conservation techniques from the Dust Bowl are now standard practice. Public works built by the CCC and the WPA, like roads, parks, and schools, still stand. Even the culture of repair and reuse, born from necessity, continues to shape how we think about sustainability and consumption. But beyond all that, the Depression taught Americans a deep, enduring truth, that innovation is about looking hardship in the eye and asking not just how do we survive, but how do we build something better. The American people took broken systems and imagined new ones. They reinvented what it meant to work, to grow, to care, and to thrive. These Depression-era innovations changed the American game, not just for the decade, but for generations. If this story inspired you, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of resilience, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.